Yes po. Good morning, sir.
Loud and clear po.
Okay, so can you see my cam? Right, um I'll just post my slide for a while. Okay, there you go. Okay, so can you see my PowerPoint presentation that I'm sharing now?
Yes po.
Okay, okay, so let's start. Again, first, thank you for the invitation to this, how do you call this, virtual learning environment of Pisau. And of course, I thank Gerald for for inviting me here. Actually, we've been planning this for a long time, pero wala akong oras. As a matter of fact, I'd like to apologize because initially this was scheduled last Friday, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to. I had a faculty meeting back then, so na-reschedule siya ngayon. So again, apologies for that. But here I am now. I'll be presenting my topic on the social in environmental science research methods and ethics. So when I was talking to Gerald regarding the topic, we were thinking kung ano nga ba yung makakabuti para specifically sa mga OJT students ng environmental science program. So we thought of coming up with a lecture of specifically focusing on the social science aspect of environmental science, specifically delving on the methods and the ethics of doing social research or environmental research. So this morning, I'll be talking about this particular theme, the social environmental science research. So with, of course, a specific focus on methods and ethics. So my presentation will be guided by the following questions. Number one, how humans and the environment relate with each other. Number two, what does environmental science research offer in understanding or addressing environmental problems? And number three, what social science or what social research methods can be used in environmental science research? And I'm also focusing on methods that can be used specifically in this pandemic. And lastly, I'll be talking about the ethical considerations in doing social research. So before I proceed further into my discussion, I want my lecture actually to be conversational. So if you have questions, just type in your questions on the chat box. And if you want to say something, if you have something to share, just feel free to voice out or speak to this virtual environment, virtual room. Okay, so let's proceed. So before anything else, I have here an activity. You have to go to www.menti.com and you have to use this code 205068. And once you're there, you have to answer this question. Write 3 words that come to mind when you hear the word environment. So kapag nakakarinig kayo ng salitang environment, ano yung 3 words or 3 phrases that would you would normally associate to environment? Okay? So nandun na ba kayo sa menti.com? So again, go to www.menti.com at kapag nandun na kayo, use the code 205068. Tingnan natin. I'll just share a new slide. Okay, again, for the benefit of everybody, again, you have to go to menti.com and you have to key in the code 205068. And the question is, write 3 words that come to mind when you hear the word environment. Oh, so here's a response here: pollution, natural resources, people. How about the others? Okay, so merong nagsulat ng ecology, diversity, natural resources, natural world. Okay, health, biodiversity, food. Yes, some more. Okay, so let's see some new words. Gift, yeah. Protect, yes, we have to protect the environment. What else? Ecology, you have ecosystem. Okay, so the responses are coming. So what else do we have here? Preservation. Okay, yes, some more response. Okay, so there are other responses here. Resources, global warming, flora and fauna. What else? Okay, so let's see, tingnan natin. Okay, so the responses are still coming. So what do we have here? Diversity. So you have, what else? Human damage. You have carbon dioxide. Okay, what else? You have food web. You have resources. You have community, habitat, food chain. So again, we have plenty of responses now here. So let's see, tingnan natin. Let's try to process this. Okay, the responses are still coming. Okay, so probably last 1 minute. So tingnan, may mga dito sa word cloud, ino-organize niya yung responses. Kung sino yung may maraming response, ito yung mas malaki yung font size ng word. So it seems like based on on your understanding, on your perception of the word environment, most of you said that it talks about the ecosystem and natural resources and biodiversity. And some of you talk about natural and climate change and people. So these are the more common terms or words that you associate when you hear the word environment. Okay. So let's see. Let's try to process what you have included here. So I'll just go back to my slide. Let's see. Share screen. Okay, there you go. Oh, I have to stop share. Share screen. Okay. So kanina when we look into the word cloud and we look into the words you commonly associate with environment, mas lumutang doon yung concepts like ecosystem, the natural world, um, what else? Yung biodiversity, and some of you mentioned people, right? So pag pinag-usapan natin yung environment, actually mayroon tayong different interpretations ng environment. And for some people, like kanina may nagsabing it's a gift, right? And we see that. Nakikita natin yung ganung perspective specifically sa mga indigenous communities. They treat the environment as a gift, as something that's sacred. So let's move further. Tingnan natin. Um, some people would normally equate environment to nature. So when we say nature, we're basically talking here of pristine nature. So ito yung mga unadulterated nature, yung wilderness, and they tend to include the non-human elements. So like for instance, when we hear of of course, alam natin yung ibig sabihin yung nature tripping, for instance, like pag tinitingnan natin yung nature tripping, saan ba nagne-nature tripping ang mga tao, especially the millennials, right? They go to, or the Gen Z, they go to say mountains, they go on hiking, right? Or pumupunta sa beach, they go diving. So ganun ang interpretation ng environment. It's actually equated to nature, to basically to pristine nature, yung hindi pa gaanong na how do you call this, na co-op ng humans. But some people would also include would have a more encompassing interpretation of the environments. Like they would include agriculture or built environments such as agriculture, cities, and urban areas. So pinapakita lang dito that when we talk about the environment, we're not only talking about nature or wilderness, but we're also talking about built environments like agriculture, cities, and urban areas. And when we look into some institutions like DNR, for instance, specifically sa EIS system, sa Environmental Impact Assessment, makikita natin dito na yung environment is actually defined based on land, or actually equated to the totality of land, air, water, and people. So like if you're doing environmental impact assessment, you're looking into the effect of a program or project on these components: land, air, water, and people. So pinapakita lang dito yung encompassing nature ng environment. And even as here sa SESAM, sa School of Environmental Science and Management dito sa UP Los Baños, we think of yung schema namin when we talk about the environment, we dichotomize it, or we basically categorize that into land, air, water, and people, and the totality of these components make up your environment. So we'll have a more, say, academic definition of environment. We're basically looking to a space, a field where interactions or interrelationships between biotic and abiotic factors are material or are relevant. So you have your living things and non-living things interacting with each other. So in a more ecological sense, your environment is actually equated to the ecosystem. It is your ecosystem. Yung more humanistic dimension lamang ng environments, that ini-emphasize that humans are integral part of the environment or ecosystem. So kasama ang humans doon sa biotic component. So we deem that humans are equally integral or equally important as the other components in your ecosystem. So yung tanong ngayon, paano nga ba tinitingnan yung relationship ng environment at saka ng society, ng humans at saka ng environment? How do we characterize the interactions basically existing between your environment and your people? So mayroong mga perspectives, there are varying perspectives as with regards to human-environment relationships or interactions. Like for instance, prior to 1950s, nauso yung environmental determinism, yung perspective ng environmental determinism. So basically, sinasabi dito that humans and environment are separate. They are isolated. Pero yung environment, it's the one affecting humans. So sinasabi dito na with environment na nakakaapekto or naipektuhan niya yung ways and means ng mga tao, like yung kultura, yung pananamit, yung pagkain, and every facets of human life. So deterministics, ibig sabihin yung environment, it poses a substantial influence, a significant influence on humans. Then come 1950s, dumating yung perspective, yung environmental possibilism opposing the tenets of environmental determinism. Sinasabi naman ng environmental possibilism na yung human ay mayroong agency na baguhin ang kanyang environment. May kakayahan siyang baguhin ang kanyang kapaligiran. So like for instance, humans engaging in agriculture, humans building cities or urban centers. So pinapakita lang dito na kayang baguhin ng mga tao, may kakayahan, may agency yung tao na baguhin yung environment. So again, the flow here is unidirectional. Okay, so it's as if saying na yung walang kakayahan yung environment na apektuhan yung tao, but it's the human beings who are affecting or influencing or changing the environmental landscape. But in latter decades, in recent decades rather, mas umigting yung systems thinking perspective. Sinasabi dito na more or less symbiotic yung relationship, interdependent yung relationship ng humans, ng society at saka ng environment. So it's sinasabi dito sa perspective na ito, it's not right to say that it's just environment affecting humans or the other way around, humans affecting the environment. So pinapakita ng systems analysis framework yung synergy, yung interaction, yung close interaction, yung interdependency ng humans at saka ng environment. So a systems analysis framework ay mahalaga para maintindihan natin yung functions, the processes, and the interactions in the environment. So when we look into functions and processes, we're looking into natural processes and social processes, natural functions and social functions. At tinitingnan natin hindi lang yung functions and processes, but how these components in your landscape are interacting with each other, how humans are interacting with the environment, and how your environment is interacting with the people. So kami dito sa School of Environmental Science and Management sa UPLB, naniniwala kami, ako personally naniniwala din ako na magkaugnay, hindi magkahiwalay, hindi isolated yung human tsaka yung human system and the environmental system. So ano yung kagandahan ng ganitong perspective? So let's try to reflect on this. Of course, you're very familiar with this. This is the Candaba wetland of course in your place in Pampanga. So if we'll try to reflect here, is there any one of you who's coming from Candaba or malapit sa Candaba, alam yung nangyayari sa Candaba? Right? Anyone who'd like to share? Yes, Sir Jemuel.
Actually, sir, I'm from Porac, but Candaba is my chosen study site. And
Okay.
Sir Jay is actually my advisor.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to conduct a heavy metal analysis there. And he said that when I searched for Candaba, I found that there are wet and dry seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Pero ang sabi pala ni Sir Jay, dapat magko-conduct doon pagkakatapos lang ng bagyo kasi doon talaga bumabaha and nauubos din yung tubig.
Mm-hmm. So parang may nag-shift yung landscape, right? So during dry months probably walang tubig. Pero pagdating ng probably rainy season or bagyo season, dumarami yung tubig. And when the rainy season is gone or when the typhoons are gone, humuhu pa kagad yung tubig. So nagkakaroon siya ng shifting landscape. And if you see here, kung nakikita nyo sa picture, nakita ko rin sa study ni Gerald because Gerald conducted, I am well abreast about this study in Candaba. At I've seen his pictures also of yung mga bahay na naka-stilts. So pinapakita lang dito na probably totoo yung environmental determinism, right? Yung environment, sinishape niya yung kultura ng mga tao, even sa type ng housing. Like yung houses are really standing on stilts. So this is of course to adjust to the environment, the environmental climate in the area. So here may katotohanan yung environmental determinism na kayang maimpluwensyahan ng environment yung kultura ng mga tao. And 'di ba, pag dry season, people there are planting pakwan or rice or other vegetables, right? Pero pag rainy season, pag dumating yung mga bagyo and when floods are coming, yung nangyayari is they're shifting to fishing. So pinapakita lang dito kung paano naapektuhan ng environment yung human dimension ng human system. Okay? Let's move on to the next slide. First, you have here the San Guillermo Parish Church. This is in the aftermath of Mount Pinatubo. Buhay na ba yung karamihan sa inyo when the Mount Pinatubo eruption happened?
Wala pa. Siguro ko yun.
Wala pa? Yeah.
Kasi edad ko yan. Edad ko yung Mount Pinatubo.
Okay, kaedad natin. Okay, so let's see here. Mayroong pag-aaral si Gaylord and Lee Mason in 2007. Tinitingnan dito yung response ng Aita communities in Pampanga dun sa volcanic eruption. Pinapakita dito na because of the volcanic eruption, because of the environmental change, nabago din yung kultura ng mga Aitas. So even yung settlement patterns, yung religious belief, yung medicine, yung social leadership, territory demarcation, even yung language, yung housing, diet, clothing, Christmas habits, livelihoods, nabago after in the aftermath or after Mount Pinatubo eruption. Again, this is an exemplification na kayang baguhin ng environment yung kultura natin. But it is also true na kaya rin natin, may agency tayo na baguhin yung environmental conditions natin. Like for instance here, I understand may pinaplano yung government ninyo na i-channel yung tubig papunta sa Pampanga River, right? So pinapakita lamang nito na may kakayahan, may agency ang tao na baguhin yung kanyang landscape. So it goes into saying that somehow may point din yung environmental possibilism, right? So but if kung titingnan natin yung if we try to disregard, hindi naman disregard, but if we try to come up with a more holistic perspective about human environmental relationship or a more systems thinking perspective kung saan parang kinukumbine yung environmental determinism at saka environmental possibilism, probably will have a better outcome, a better understanding of the world we live in, of our landscapes, of our surroundings, right? So let's move further. Again, let's go to menti.com again, and you have to use the code 205068. So the question now is, write the 3 most pressing environmental problems in your locality. It could be your municipality or it could be your province. So again, go to www.menti.com and you have to use the code 205068. And again, the question, write the 3 most pressing environmental problems in your locality or municipality. Okay, let's see. Tingnan natin. Let's. Oh, so I'll just share this slide because the responses are already coming. Share. Okay, there you go. So merong waste management, water pollution, there's sustainability, health, flora, surroundings, global warming, waste segregation. I think sumabay yata yung ibang responses dito kanina sa tanong. But yung malaki dito, it's water pollution and waste management. Seems like this is a dominant problem not only in your locality but even in other localities in the country, in other areas in the country rather. So waste management, water pollution, and waste segregation. Right. Okay, so the responses are coming. Waste management. What else? Global warming, waste disposal, solid waste. So really, madaming responses on waste, on solid waste and water pollution, right? Waste segregation, proper waste segregation. Okay, so let's try to reflect on this. Deforestation is here. What else? Grass fire, quarrying. Okay, so again, yung more dominant the problem that's very evident now, you have water pollution and you have waste segregation and waste management problem. Right? So I'll go back to my PowerPoint presentation. Share screen. There you go. Okay. So again, like I've said kanina, yung pinaka-problema ninyo sa inyong locality, it's really waste management and water pollution. So if we try to reflect on this, what's causing this? Is it caused by natural processes, or is it more anthropogenic? Is it caused by humans, right? So if we reflect on what's posted there in the Menti's screen on your responses, pinapakita lang dito that most of the problems we're confronted with are really anthropogenic in nature. They're caused by humans, by human behavior. So let's look further. So how do we understand environmental problems? This what I'm showing you now is the research framework of SESAM here in UPLB. Pinapakita lang dito yung iba't ibang ecosystems from ridge to reef. So you have your forest ecosystem, you have your marginal lands, you have your agro ecosystem, your industrial ecosystem, your urban zone, urban ecosystem, you have your mangrove ecosystem, down to your coastal and marine ecosystem. Okay, so and if we look into it further, bawat ecosystem may kanya-kanyang sariling problema, right? And sometimes the problems are cross-cutting. It cuts across ecosystems. Like for instance, when you talk about forest ecosystem, you have habitat loss, biodiversity loss, you have forest fragmentation, timber poaching, and illegal collection of minor forest products, right? So, and if we look deeper into the problems listed here, all of these are anthropogenic in nature. So pinapakita lang dito yung influence ng tao sa environment. In other words, yung utilization ng tao ng environment, it's leading to some damages, some problems, some issues which are actually detrimental to the welfare of humans. So humans utilizing the environment probably unsustainably, and at the same time, so ibig sabihin nagbe-benefit siya, but because unsustainable yung use ng ating mga ecosystems, ng ating resources, we bear the brunt of these environmental problems. Tayo rin in the end yung nagsasuffer. So the question now, bakit kailangan ng environmental science in understanding these problems? Sinabi natin kanina, the problems in nature, like for instance, if we look into habitat loss or biodiversity loss, may components siya ng natural. Why? Because we're talking about yung pagkawala ng living organisms. If we're talking about biodiversity loss, or if we're talking about habitat, say yung forest loss, yung pagbaba ng forest cover, pinapakita rin dito na yung mayroong siyang natural component in the sense that umiikse yung forest cover. So yung natural processes ay naapektuhan. Pero again, mahalaga dito yung more social component. Bakit nagkakaroon ng biodiversity losses? Bakit nagkakaroon ng forest cover losses? So in short, yung environmental problem natin ay mayroong ecological component, or mayroong physical or natural component, and at the same time, mayroong social component. So if that is the case, there is a need for us to come up with with a discipline, with a field that really tries to understand these environmental problems in a more holistic and a more integrative manner. So yung environmental science, it's an integrative, interdisciplinary field as it incorporates ideas, approaches, and methods from multiple disciplines, from the natural sciences and from the social sciences. So it integrates natural sciences like your biology, chemistry, hydrology, geology, physics, and social sciences as well, like economics, political science, geography, sociology, psychology, anthropology. So ibig sabihin, when we look at environmental problem, hindi lang siya natural process. It's not only say an aberration on the natural process or functions, but it malaki ang kinalaman ng human systems, ng humans, or human actions or human behavior in explaining that environmental change or changes. So yung environmental science, it tries to, like what I've said, it tries to bridge yung natural sciences and saka social sciences in order for you to come up with a more integrative, a more holistic understanding of the problem. So, kanina, when we were doing our Menti number 2, sabi nyo, isa sa most common problem that you encounter in your locality is water pollution. So, now your question, what expertise or disciplines, to natural sciences and to social sciences, would you bring in for you to understand and address water pollution, say for instance in Pampanga River? Right? So again, you have to go to menti.com and use the code 111-36550. So kung titingnan nyo yung water pollution, o say in Pampanga River, sa example lang to, ano yung expertise? Ano kaya yung expertise o di kaya disciplines na kailangan nyo that you should bring in for you to better understand or better address water pollution? So you must be able to identify 2 from the natural sciences and 2 from the social sciences. Okay, so I'll go to Menti again. So let's check kung ano yung mga responses nyo.
Sir Ed, limited yung answer into 3.
Yeah, okay. So tatlo na lang. So
Ah.
so either isang natural o dalawang social science, or dalawang natural or isang social science. Okay. So 3 disciplines that you would bring in to understand the water pollution problem, say in Pampanga River. Okay, so the responses are coming. So I'll just project the Menti for you to see kung ano yung mga responses. Psychology, freshwater ecology, anthropology. Right? So dalawang social science ang nilagay niya dito, psychology and anthropology. At meron ding freshwater ecology. So what else? So environmental planner, right? Climate science, and what else? Hydrology, KAP analysis. So water management, ecology, behavioral sciences, geology. Let's see. Let's hear some more. So again, go to menti.com. The code is 111-36550. So let's see. Tingnan natin kung ano pang ibang responses. So, but here we were seeing na maraming perspectives yung pwedeng isama in order for us to understand the water pollution problem. So management perspective, water sampling, this is more hydrological. Hydrology is there, water chemistry, right? Sociology, what else? Biology. Right. Governance, good. So political science or institutional perspective. What else? We have sustainability science, willingness to pay. So this is more economic in nature, right? So what else? So responses are still coming. GIS, spatial analysis, that's good. What else? So dominant dito sa responses na yung management na perspective, anthropology, psychology, water sampling or hydrology. Right? So, but again, pinapakita lang dito, again, the point of the exercise is actually, pinapakita lang dito that you can bring in as many disciplines to really understand, to really dig deeper into the water pollution problem. So, ibig sabihin, when we talk about water pollution, hindi lang siya limited sa natural sciences, right? We're not only talking here of the hydrology or the chemistry, water chemistry, but we're also looking into, say, the biological aspect, probably yung climate science, probably nakaka-apekto yung temperature sa water quality, right? Or on the other hand, pinapakita rin dito na maraming social science perspective ang pwedeng mong you should bring into the table for you to better grasp the water pollution problem. So again, imagine ninyo when you have these perspectives, different perspectives in trying to unravel, to decipher, to understand, to analyze, to assess the water pollution problem, probably will have a more or less complete picture of why water pollution is happening, of how it's affecting the ecosystem, right? So I'll end this slide here. I'll proceed to my slide. share screen. Here we go, share. Okay, so again, yung lesson dito, mas naiintindihan natin yung environmental problem if we bring in, if we rationalize yung mga disciplines that na pwede nating we put on the table so that we'll have a more holistic, more integrative understanding of a particular environmental problem. So ipinapakita lang dito na when we talk about environmental problem, hindi lang siya domain ng natural science. Hindi rin siya domain lang ng social science. As a matter of fact, it would be better if we will try to some sort of integrate fields in the natural sciences and the social sciences for us to have a better grasp of the environmental problem that we're talking about. And environmental science is actually doing that. That's basically the beauty of environmental science. So ini-integrate niya ang iba't ibang disiplina across natural sciences and social sciences to come up with a different understanding of your environmental problem, right? So yun yung kagandahan ng disiplina ng environmental science, right? So let's look now into this particular aspect. So we've talked about yung position in environmental science vis-a-vis doon sa environmental problem and addressing the environmental problem. Now we'll look into ano nga ba yung purpose ng social science research. Bakit tayo? Why again? Since yung focus ng topic ko is the social aspect of environmental science research. So basically, I'll be looking into social science research at kung paano siya makakatulong para maunawaan natin yung environmental problem or the environmental conditions or the landscapes or ecosystems that we're trying to unravel. So for you as a student, you're doing your thesis or your research, probably yung motivation nyo, it's a class requirement, right? You want to complete your degree, di ba? Kasi kapag hindi kayo mag-conduct ng thesis nyo, hindi kayo ng research nyo, probably you won't be able to earn your degree or complete your degree. So for professionals, probably it's yung motivation natin is promotion. Kasi like if we look into our promotion system, our promotion instrument, kayo dyan sa CHED, and kami dito sa UP, talagang may malaki ang puntos na binibigay doon sa research, specifically if it's translated to publication. And also, there are monetary rewards to doing research, or specifically social science research. Pero yung pinakamalagi dito, yung public goods nature ng research. So this is not only about social science research, but all types of researches. Like when we do research, we contribute to the body of knowledge. So we are developing knowledge, right? So we come up with new ideas, with new explanations, probably new theories, probably validation of existing theories, right? But the point here is when we do research, we want to contribute to an existing body of knowledge, right? So it's as if parang when we talk about, say for instance, the body of knowledge, nandun yung mga experts, mga scholars, academics talking about that particular field. So yung research mo would contribute to that discussion. So you are actually contributing to the development of that body of knowledge. You are contributing to the existing conversation in that body of knowledge. So analyzing, providing solutions to social environmental problems, I guess this is the more relevant purpose of doing research. Gusto natin ma-contribute in providing recourse to the environmental problems that we are confronted with. And aside from that, we want to dispel lies and myths. Kaya tayo nagre-research kasi may mga how you call this, fake news, wrong information, disinformation, misinformation, myths, lies. surrounding these environmental problems that we would want to dispel or to disprove. That's why we're doing research. Then at the same time, we are also creating or increasing public awareness. So kapag yung research natin na-translate siya into more usable form, it's communicated to policymakers or to communities, we're basically increasing public awareness. So may public goods nature yung research natin. In other words, although we think about the personal rewards, pero at the back or the other side of the coin, makikita natin na may contribution din yung research na ginagawa natin sa society at large. So, yung question now, what are your planning considerations when you're doing social science research? Right? Number one, is it original? Yung tanong dito, why will you be doing something na ginawa na ng iba? Why will you be, say, parang repeating what other researchers have done? So you ask, yung ginagawa mo ba, is it original? Is it novel? Right? So how do you address this question? You really have to read. You have to look into the literature, right? What's been published about the topic that you would want to pursue. Kasi kung mayroon nang gumawa ng water assessment sa Pampanga River, baka naman bigyan mo ng kaunting twist yung pag-aaral mo. Right? So you might want to add some aspects to water quality assessment. You might want to say review kung ano yung methods na ginamit, yung research design, and probably think something para maiba naman doon sa nagawa na. Right? So another question, is it doable? Are there sufficient resources? So minsan ito yung nagiging problema, right? We have a very good blueprint on how to undertake our research. We have a very good proposal, but when it boils down to resources, that's what's hindering us from pursuing the research, right? So when we talk about resources, we're talking here of time, of money, of probably manpower, right? So we consider these factors when we undertake our research, right? So kapag nag-research kayo sa Candaba, you think of the expenses, right? At tinitingnan mo, ano yung mga resources na kailangan mo? Will you be able to mobilize these resources para ma-undertake yung study? And of course, if you don't have sufficient resources, marami pang pwedeng explore na avenue to access resources. So you have to look for funding for your research. So another question, is it relevant? Will it contribute to the body of knowledge? And much better to ask this question, will it contribute to society? Right? So iniisip din natin yung relevance ng research natin. Another one, is the research design coherent? So ibig sabihin ng coherence na coherent na research design, nagtutugma ba yung objectives mo? I mean, research problem, you have a research problem, then you come up with research questions on that problem. Then after coming up with research question, probably you form objectives. After forming objectives, you look into ways on how to gather the data requirement to fulfill those objectives. So you have to think about your data collection method. Then afterwards, you have to look into your analysis. So dapat coherent yung design ng iba't ibang facets ng research development. So at the end of the day, yung dapat sagutin mo as a researcher, yung methods mo ba, the approaches that you are using, the methods of analysis that you will be using, are they enough? Are they sufficient to answer your research questions or objectives? Another question, ito yung isa sa probably the more important consideration when we're doing social science research. How do you keep it ethical? Will it put anyone at risk? So take note, when we do social science research, we're dealing with humans. We're dealing with people. So people have emotions, right? People are logical, nag-iisip. So how will you keep your research ethical in such a way na you won't be putting anyone at risk? And lastly, how will your research outputs be utilized or translated to more usable forms? All right? Hindi lang dapat nag-end dun sa submission ng 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 research ng manuscript, but you think of ways on how it can be translated into more usable forms. Paano makikinabang yung policymakers? Paano mo ito may babalik sa community where you got your study, where you did your study, right? And yung isa pang mahalagang question, are you ready to undertake it? Right? So you have to also assess your preparedness, your emotional, psychological preparedness to undertake the research. Kasi baka naman, alam mo yun, wala doon yung drive mo, yung enthusiasm to undertake the research, and it might impede your data collection, your analysis of data that you have gathered. So dapat you should be ready emotionally, psychologically, and even physically to undertake your research. Now, let's move on. So when we talk about social science research, some of us would probably think na social science, baka since hindi gumagamit ng laboratory experiment, baka hindi rin gumagamit ng scientific method. Right? So that's a very wrong conception, because yung scientific method, it's well associated to the natural sciences. But dito sa social science research, we're actually doing scientific method. Like we start by asking a question, right? Ano yung research problem? Then you read about that problem in order for you to nourish your understanding about the problem. Then you formulate your hypothesis. Ano yung mga assumptions mo about the problem? Ano yung expectations mo of that problem? So you design and conduct the study. So dito pumapasok yung methods, the frameworks, the analysis that you will be using. Then you draw conclusions from it, and you report the result. So basically, pareho din yung pinagdadaanan ng natural science at saka ng natural science research at saka ng social science research. Siguro nagkakaiba lang doon sa subject matter. So natural science people, say biologists, chemists, would look into your natural environment, your physical environment. Pero dito sa social science, sabi mo kanina, we're talking about people, we're talking about human behavior, we're talking about human interaction. We're also talking about how humans interact with their environment. Right? So, and we follow here in social science, we follow the scientific method. At isa pang kaibahan aside from the subject matter, yung design. Kasi yung design sa natural science, it's some of the variables, most of the variables being na pinag-aaralan sa natural science are controlled, pwedeng makontrol, right? Like you can take a specimen and study it in a microscope in a laboratory, right? But as a social science, it's totally different. You'll be talking about people. You cannot just do experiment on people. There are ethical considerations or ethical issues that must be considered when you're doing a research on people, right? You're extracting information from them. So ano yung ethics involved in that particular aspect? So ibig sabihin, may kanya-kanyang may pagkakaiba, may kanya-kanyang requirement in natural science sa social science, pero hindi nagkakaiba in terms of scientific method. In other words, they're following the scientific method. Both of the disciplines, or the disciplines in natural sciences and the social sciences, are following the scientific method. So Yung tanong ngayon, how do you design your research? I guess this is the more important part of the discussion. So we've moved to the meat of our discussion. So when we talk about research design in the social sciences, may tatlong klase ng research design. Three more dominant, or three how do you call this? Dominant research design in the social sciences. Una, yung quantitative. Diba? Pag sinabing quantitative, baka sa natural science yan. No. Social science also employ a quantitative research design. So pag sinabi natin quantitative research, we're dealing with numbers. We're dealing with numerical data, data that can be counted. Right? So we collect them and we analyze them. So that is what we mean by quantitative data, data that can be counted. Like, gaano kalaki yung population sa Candaba, right? So you count the number of people. So that's basically that involves quantitative research. Or say, gaano ka rich yung yung how do you call this, or gaano karami yung households living along Pampanga River, right? You count. So that involves quantitative research. Right? So ano yung purpose ng quantitative research? Basically, it's used to generalize. So we do quantitative research kasi we would want to generalize something about your population. We want to say something about the population. So we find patterns. We make predictions. We test causality. So once, pag sinabing predictions, once you have the data, what's going to happen in the future, in the succeeding months, years, or so on. So you predict. Or ano yung more likely magiging behavior ng tao given this numerical data? Or causality. When we talk about causality, we're talking about how one variable affects the other. Right? So later mas maunawaan pa itong mga purposes nito. So yung analysis, since we're dealing with numerical data, we're talking about statistical mathematical techniques. So it could be descriptive, it could be correlational. Descriptive, we use frequency, we use the mode, median, average, the range. These are your descriptive statistics. You use this to describe your numerical data. So probably you can do correlational analysis, like you relate one variable to the other. Then sinasabi dito, sampling design is vital. Since we cannot cover, let's say if we're doing a survey, we cannot cover, kapag malaki, say your scale is Pampanga and you want to look into the households in Pampanga, probably you'll have hundreds of thousands or thousands of households in Pampanga, and you can't cover every household. So you must come up with a sampling design. In other words, ano yung ilang representative sample yung kukunin mo from that population so that you can generalize, say something about that population. So ibig sabihin, yung sample size mo should be enough to characterize, to generalize something about the population where it's taken from. So sample must be representative of the population. So ganito yung analysis when you're doing quantitative research. There's when you're looking into numerical data, when you're collecting numerical data. Like for instance, I have here some questions or sample questions. The first one, how many farmers in Pampanga are using organic and inorganic fertilizers and pesticides? 'Di ba? How many? You need to count. So ibig sabihin, kailangan mo ng quantitative data. Right? Another one, how will the imposition of payment for environmental services, say environmental fees, affect the number of tourists in Mount Arayat? Kapag siningil mo yung mga turistang pumapasok sa Mount Arayat, how will it affect the number of visits to Mount Arayat? So this is quantitative data, right? So another question, what are the characteristics of the solid waste of households in Barangay Magalang? Right. So ibig sabihin, kailangan mong probably you need to quantify yung solid waste sa Barangay Magalang, right? So you deal with numbers. So you would probably inspect kung ano yung nandun sa basura, then quantify yung iba't ibang components ng basura na yun in order for you to characterize yung basura ng mga households in Barangay Magalang. In order for you to do that, you need a more quantitative design. Another question here, has the hydrometeorological patterns in Pampanga changed in the last 50 years? So last 50 years, so you need a time series data. You need longitudinal data. So ibig sabihin, kailangan mo ng, we're talking about numerical data here. Right? Ano yung say yung temperature from 1950 to this year, or kung ano mang 50-year period, or rainfall pattern. So you're dealing with numbers, right? So yung question now, if we have these problems, anong quantitative research method yung gagamitin natin? Isa-isay natin. One quantitative research method that we often use when we deal with quantitative research design is the survey. We're very much familiar with the survey, right? Somebody facilitate, or the researcher facilitates a questionnaire, at yung mga questions are close-ended. Okay, so you just tick and tick and tick, right? From one question, one category of questions to another, until you finish the instrument, responding to the instrument. So yung survey, how can it be done? It could be done in person, so face-to-face. It could be done over the phone, or it could be done online. So over the phone, usually sa US, ito yung ginagawa. Yung mga surveyors, yung nagsisensus or nagkakandak ng survey, or even researchers, tumatawag lang sa phone ng bawat households. And nagkakaroon na ngayon na you get to collect data, right? Then online, now nauuso yung Google form, right? Survey over Google form. But of course, sa survey, may caveat dito. Since the intent of quantitative design is to say something about the population, so you take a sample out of that population. So mahalaga yung sample. So in other words, dapat how do you ensure na reliable, na valid, na credible yung data na makukuha mo? So napakahalaga ng sample. Dapat randomize yung sample to eliminate the bias. Ibig sabihin, randomize yung sample. Ibig sabihin, wala kang criteria. It's like drawing, you put, say, you have a fishbowl, and you put all the names there, tapos you just pick them randomly, then that's basically randomization. Wala kang pattern. So everything is, wala kang iniisip na criteria in drawing your sample from the population. So that basically eliminates the bias. So ito yung sinasabi ko kanina, sa Google form, mahirap mag-randomize when you're using Google form or Google platform. Paano ka mag-randomize? Kasi yung nangyari sa Google platform, kung sino lang yung available, siya lang ang sumasagot. So who are more likely to answer? Siguro yung may mga gadgets. Paano yung mga walang gadgets na hindi mo na survey, right? So may problematic yung Google form as a survey instrument, right? Because you have to consider you have to eliminate the bias. You have to randomize your sampling. Okay? So But the idea here, whether it's face to face or over the phone, dapat ni-randomize mo. By randomizing, you come up with a list of individuals or households. Then you pick randomly without any criteria. So probably pwede kang magkaroon ng how do you call this, ng generator. Mayroon ng mga random generator online, so you can make use of that. Or probably you can make use of the fishbowl method. That's basically to randomize your sampling. Okay? So survey, hindi siya, some would say, ang dali na mag-survey ka, madali lang yan. No, you really have to consider these assumptions, specifically on the elimination of the bias on the randomization of your sampling design. So like for instance, in this question, how many farmers in Pampanga are using organic and inorganic farming fertilizers and pesticides? You can do this if you do a survey, right? So sa survey mo doon, you'll probably have a question, gumagamit ka ba ng organic fertilizer? Gumagamit ka ba ng inorganic fertilizer? Yes or no? Gumagamit ka ba ng organic pesticide? Yes or no? Gumagamit ka ba ng inorganic pesticide? Yes or no? Right? So yung farmer na makukuha mo will just keep on taking. Pero again, like what I said, malaga yung sampling. So you have to come up with a list of farmers, then make sure na yung pag-draw mo ng sample mo is random. Okay? Then another method aside from the survey is the use of experiments. Right? So iniisip natin na yung mga natural scientists lang yung experiment. No. Dito sa social science, we also do experiments, specifically in the field of psychology, and even in the field of economics, we do experiments. So dito, we are controlling or manipulating an independent variable to measure its effect on a dependent variable. Like for instance, this question, how will the imposition of payment for environmental services affect the number of tourists in Mount Arayat? So you can do an experiment. Subukan mong maglagay ng 20 pesos na entrance fee or 100 pesos na entrance fee. Tingnan mo kung ano nangyayari sa number of visits. Will it decrease? Will it increase? Right? So that's experimentation. Pero we take a lot of caution, specifically when we do this particular method. Right? Kasi you cannot play, you can just experiment on individuals. Right? Hindi pwedeng mag-experiment ka lang ng payment for environmental services or user fee, environmental fee, para lang makita how the people were behaving. So in other words, malaki yung responsibility mo if you're doing that. Why? Because you're basically dealing with people. So what else? Experiments. Say for instance, hindi mo kokolektahin yung basura or ipe-penalize mo rather yung hindi magse-segregate ng basura depending on, say, on the volume of the garbage or the solid waste. So there involves some experimentation there, and you deal with quantities, with numbers, because you talk about volume, right? But you cannot just do that. Anong mangyayari kung hindi makolekta ang basura? Probably kung walang pambayad yung mga tao, right? So, or in other words, when we do experiment, we take a lot of caution. Why? Because we're basically influencing human behavior. We're affecting human behavior. Okay? So, and later on, I'll be talking about the ethics of doing this, specifically on experiments. And third, observation. So you identify a behavior or occurrence of interest and monitor it in its natural setting. So you do some counting. You sit on a corner, then you count. So nandun ka sa natural setting. You're not affecting the natural setting. You're just there to observe, to take, to count. So like for instance, what are the characteristics of the solid waste of households in Barangay Magalang? So like what I said a while ago, you open up their how do you call this, their trash bins or trash cans. at tingnan mo ano yung component ng trash can na yun. Then you count or probably you measure the volume. That's the way to characterize yung solid waste. Right? So it involves some observation at the same time some measurement. Then secondary data, collecting data that has been gathered for a purpose, for other purposes. Example, you have census, national surveys, or historical records. So ibig sabihin, pag sinabi natin secondary data, hindi ikaw yung nag-gather. It's been gathered by other people, pero ginagamit mo for your study. You can do that. Okay? So like yung say national census, like yung say on population, kung gusto mong tingnan yung demographic characteristic ng Pampanga, hindi mo na kailangan mag-survey on your own kasi mayroon ng secondary data on that. You make use of that. Right? So like for instance, record on rainfall. Mayroon tayong record on rainfall sa Pag-asa. So you can make use of that. These are secondary data, historical records na pwede mong magamit. Like for instance, the question here, has the hydrometeorological pattern in Pampanga changed in the last 50 years? Again, kailangan mo ng data on hydrometeorological patterns, rainfall, temperature, right? And you can gather that. May secondary data on that. Okay? Pero pag walang available, let's say you would want to have it site specific, you would want at a particular point in time, you would want to measure yung rainfall, yung temperature, you can do that. So it becomes now a primary data. Okay. So again, pinapakita lang dito na huwag ka agad-agad mag-gather ng data. Try to check, baka naman may secondary data na pwede mong magamit. Because that saves you time, that saves you money, that saves your resources. At mas madali kang matatapos sa research mo. So try, in other words, when you're doing your research, specifically kapag nandun ka na sa data collection na part, tingnan mo ano yung mga data requirements mo, ano yung mga data needs mo, at saan mo makukuha itong mga data needs. You try to reflect on that kasi baka may available sa munisipyo, may available sa barangay, may available sa PSA, sa Philippine Statistics Authority. So you have to explore these databases or their databases. Right? So ano yung advantages ng quantitative na research design? It's very efficient. Diba? Pag nag-survey ka, ibigay mo lang yung questionnaire, let them tick and tick, tapos na, right? You just process the data. And yung replicability, mataas yung replicability. Ibig sabihin, if you do a survey in this particular town, you can use the same instrument, same survey instrument on another town, right? So mataas yung replicability. Reliability as well. Specifically, if you have a very large sample and at ginawa mo yung sampling design in the right manner, in the proper manner, then that's going to be an advantage. You'll have a more or less reliable data. So critique, costly, very costly, right? Survey pa lang, it entails a lot of cost, right? You need enumerators to do the survey. So good thing, pero pwede mo naman itong maiwasan. Like dito like for instance sa research design, specifically in survey, you can talk about scale. Pag-isipan mo yung scale, baka naman hindi buong Pampanga yung kailangan mo yung survey. Baka naman yung selected municipalities lang or selected barangays in a particular town, right? So in other words, you really have to think about the design, specifically when you're doing a survey because it's costly. Okay? Another critique, it misses out the contextual detail. Ibig sabihin nito, di ba pag sa survey, tick lang tick, you don't know kung ano yung konteksto ng response nila kasi walang pagpapalalim na nagaganap. So parang superficial lang pag survey. Right? Or pag any other quantitative method. or experiment, right? So another thing is structural bias. May bias ka specifically when you're designing your survey. Sometimes hindi mo maiwasang mailagay yung bias mo. May gusto kang ninanais na response na ma-elicit from your respondents. So yung tendency mo is to draft the questions in a way na ma-elicit mo yung kailangan mong sagot. So that's a bias. That's a structural bias. So you have to avoid that. And basically, this is the critique about the quantitative method. Less detail on the depth of emotions, behaviors, motivations. Probably yung KAP, which has been discussed yesterday, like you talk about their perceptions, pero walang pagpapalalim na nagaganap. Like you talk about their, say, attitude. Nagtatapon ka ba ng basura? Oo, hindi. Siyempre, sasagot sila ng hindi. Right? May Hawthorne effect. Ayaw nilang ma-put into bad light doon sa researcher sa nagsusurvey sa kanila. So they'll say out yung mga responses nila pwedeng positive lahat. Because and again, yung downside dito when we're doing survey, walang pagpapalalim na nagaganap. Unlike the qualitative methods, like say if you're doing interview, right? Mas napapalalim mo yung discussion, yung pag-extract, yung pag-gather ng information. Okay? So important variables may be left out. So sa survey, pag dinesign mo na yung survey, yun na yun. You make use of pilot testing. You pilot your survey instrument, for instance, or your experiment, pinapilot mo before the actual implementation of these instruments para makita mo kung anong kailangan i-revise. Pero kahit na pilot mo na siya, later makikita mo na you can't cover everything. Take note, you have to look into the length of your survey. Hindi dapat mahaba yung survey mo. You have to look into the convenience of your respondents, right? So some variables may be left out. Okay? So ito yung quantitative research design. So doon sa mga nag-OJT, probably you can reflect on your paper, on your research topic. Ano kaya yung posible kong instrument na magamit dito among these quantitative research methods, right? Will you be using survey, experiments? Will you be using observation? Will you be using secondary data? So reflect on them. Okay. Then another research design, qualitative method. Ito yung usually na-associate sa social science. Pero take note, both quantitative and qualitative method could be present in the natural sciences, in natural science research, and they're also present in social science research. Okay? Hindi ibig sabihin na pag natural science, automatically quantitative data. Pag social science, qualitative data. No, it's not like that. Like for instance, yung mga botanist, right? Diba? Pag sinusurvey nila yung landscape, they make qualitative description of the landscape or of the flora present in the area. Hindi lang sila nagka-count, but they do some more qualitative description of the flora or the flora present in the area. Right? So, ibig sabihin, yung qualitative design ay ginagamit din ng mga natural scientists. Okay? So, qualitative research involves collecting and analyzing non-numerical data. It could be text, it could be video, it could be audio, to understand concepts, opinions, and experiences of people. So again, yung purpose dito, it's used to gather in-depth insight into a problem or to generate new ideas and at the same time to look into patterns. So ito yung kagandahan niya. Unlike kanina sa quantitative, walang deepening na nagaganap, which you can do here if you have a qualitative research design. So the qualitative research design is more common in the field of sociology and anthropology. Okay? So like for instance, if you have these questions here, tingnan natin yung mga question. How does the youth of San Fernando perceive the various local environmental ordinances in place? Or hindi ko ito na kompleto. How are local officials in Angeles City go over, say, yung e-waste? Right? So, ano kaya yung method na if you have this kind of questions, ano kaya yung method na pwedeng gamitin, yung qualitative method na pwedeng gamitin? Let's see, let's try to look into the qualitative methods. You have here again survey. Kanina, nandun siya sa quantitative, but now it can also be considered a qualitative method. Kanina, sa quantitative method, yung qualifier doon, dapat yung survey mo ay closed-ended. So, ibig sabihin, yung choices mo is either true or false, pipili lang sila doon sa choices, they keep on tick. Ibig sabihin, canned na yung mga choices. They just have to tick and tick. Pero dito, sa qualitative na survey, you have open-ended questions. Diba? So, pwede palang mag-survey, pero ang open-ended yung questions mo. So like for instance, how does the youth of San Fernando perceive the various local ordinances in place? So tatanong ka sa mga youth, ano yung opinion mo, anong masasabi mo sa ordinance na ito? Ano masasabi mo sa ordinance na ito? Right? So hindi lang limited yung response at pwede pang magkaroon ng deepening. So, ito yung kagandahan ng survey na open-ended. You'll have a richer data, thicker data, and may deepening na nagaganap. So, aside from survey, you have interviews. So, when we do interview, we personally ask people questions in one-on-one conversations. Like for instance, kanina dun sa question, na yung mga say local officials, ano yung perception nila doon sa e-waste management. So you can do interviews kasi konti lang naman yung local officials, right? So probably you have key informants. You can talk. You can interview the mayor. You can interview the other officials and the other heads of agencies in your locality. Right? So another method, focus group discussions, personally asking questions and generating discussion among a group of people. So grupo naman to. Kung kanina sa survey, you have a questionnaire pero open-ended at binibigay mo sa bawat tao or dun sa sample mo. Then dito sa interview, yung ginagawa mo dito, it's one-on-one. You go there, you meet the key informant personally or pwedeng online now that we have COVID, and you engage in conversations. You have an interview guide. You're guided by some questions, and you just you throw those questions to whoever you're interviewing, and of course you elicit response from these key informants. Pero dito sa focus group discussion, grupo naman yung kinakausap mo, right? So probably it could be a group of women, it could be a group of farmers, it could be a group of youth, right? So yung kagandahan dito sa focus group discussions, mas napapalalim pa yung mga tanong because nagkakaroon ng sharing, right? Nagkakaroon ng sharing of ideas, opinions about the questions that you are throwing at them. So again, you have survey, interview, you have focus groups. You have another method here, ethnography or participant observation. Dito naman sa ethnography, you go to the field in their natural setting and you observe, you even participate. Pwede ring mas mahabaan yung stay mo sa field. You can stay there for like 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, or 6 months. So matagalan, you observe paano namumuhay ka. In other words, you immerse in the community at tinitingnan mo kung paano sila namumuhay. Paano yung, specifically if you're dealing with a topic, how are they going over on their daily lives with the topic that you have in mind, right? Without hindi mo, how do you call this, like for instance, when you're doing interview, kasi dito sa participant observation, nakikipag-usap ka sa natural setting. Like kung naglalaba yung mga tao, nandun ka sa community, you are immersing, probably makikilaba ka rin, makikipag-engage sa kwentuhan. So you make sure na hindi siya disruptive. Okay? So these methods are basically done by anthropologists and some sociologists and some psychologists, specifically yung nandun sa social psychology. Right? So they go to a field. Some anthropologists would stay in the field for a long period of time para lang maintindihan yung behavior ng tao in that particular area. Right? Say if the researcher would look into water pollution in Pampanga River, probably makikita rin siya sa kabahayan along the river and i-observe niya without distorting or distracting yung natural setting, yung cultural setting, observation lang, or even participation kung anong ginagawa ng mga locals. And by doing that, you get a very rich data of how they are polluting the rivers, how they are utilizing the rivers. And somehow, mas truthful yung data mo kasi nakikita mo, nakikipagmamuhay ka sa kanila. But again, yung downside here, it may take a long time. Yung stay mo sa field could take a long time. Then another one, secondary research. So pwede pa lang yung secondary research mo is on qualitative data. Yes, you can collect like images, text, audio or video recordings, or pag-aaral na qualitative ng ibang researchers. You can do that. Okay? So, but the point here, doon sa quantitative na secondary research, yung data na kinukuha mo ay quantitative, numerical. Pero dito, sa secondary research, under qualitative research method, yung data na kinukuha mo ay qualitative in nature. Text, images, audio, or video. Right? These are qualitative data. Okay? So, yung challenge ngayon sa qualitative data, unlike sa quantitative data, you just do statistical analysis. May mga software na available. You can use SPSS, or if you're doing some econometric analysis, you can use some Stata, for instance, and other economic software. Right? Pero dito sa qualitative, ito yung challenge. Like if you're gathering qualitative data, how do you analyze your qualitative data? Like for instance, if you did a survey using open-ended questions, mahaba for sure yung responses doon. If you're doing an interview, right, mahaba yung responses. At may conversation pa na nagaganap. Right? So yung question, how do you analyze? So first, you have to organize your qualitative data. You make use of transcriptions. Kung nag-interview ka, you transcribe it. Kung meron kang field notes, i-type mo yan. When you do ethnography and you write it down in your field notes, i-type mo yung field notes mo. When you're doing a survey, again, you organize your data. You organize mo yung data. You take it out from your survey instruments, the responses from your survey instruments. So once na nailatag mo na siya, you review the responses at i-decipher mo yung patterns. Ano yung mga recurring na responses? Like for instance, nag-interview ka ng mga local officials. Say you have interviewed 10 local officials. At tiningnan mo yung transcript ng bawat isa, may mga recurring responses. So ito na yung patterns. Kung kanina doon sa quantitative research design, we're also looking for patterns. Pero yung ginagawa natin, we do statistical or mathematical analysis. Pero dito, this is how we do it. So, mano-mano, we read the transcripts, we decipher kung ano yung mga recurring responses. Sometimes, some researchers would assign codes or themes. Like, itong response na ito related sa ganitong theme. So, iko-code mo siya. Itong response na ito related naman pa sa ganitong theme. hanggang sa makabuo ka ng mga thematic analytical themes, right? From your codes, from the categories that you made. So that's how you build that's how you make sense rather of your qualitative data. It's totally different from the quantitative data, right? So yung question, ano yung advantage? Yung advantage naman ng qualitative design, meaningful yung insights kasi mas napapalalim mo yung survey, yung interview, yung ethnography mo, right? And it facilitates the generation of ideas. Hindi lang limited, like for instance, if you do say yung close-ended na quantitative na survey, very limited yung information na makukuha mo. Specifically kapag tick lang ng tick sa box yung mga respondents mo. Right. So, yung critique, yung critique naman dito, yung subjectivity, yung researcher's bias. Right? Specifically doon sa, like for instance, doon sa pag-frame mo ng questions, doon sa open-ended na survey, or di kaya doon sa mga guide questions, may certain level of subjectivity ka doon eh. Like for instance, if you do ethnography, if you immerse on the field for a long period of time, may mga areas ka lang natitingnan eh. Pwedeng magkaganon. In other words, you'll be influenced by your bias. So, isa pang downside dito is that yung generalizability, like for instance, when you go to the field, will you be able to generalize something out of your stay in the field? Will you be able to generalize, say we're talking about yung Pampanga River, pero nag-field work ka lang sa isang area along Pampanga River. Yung data mo ba doon, will it say something of all the communities along Pampanga River? Diba? So, unlike kapag nag-survey na quantitative, na close-ended, and you did your sampling along yung mga households along the river, mataas yung generalizability ng data na makukuha mo. Pero dito sa qualitative design, limited yung generalizability. And it's labor-intensive, right? So yung pag-interview pa lang, you hop from one informant to another. Unlike we survey, ibigay mo lang doon sa na-randomize mo na napili ng mga respondents, bigay mo lang questionnaire, or ikaw yung magtitik doon sa questionnaire, you ask the question at ikaw magtitik, right? At pag natapos na, madali na lang mag-analyze. I-run mo lang sa software. You code it, decode it rather. You organize your data, i-run mo sa software. Tapos na. Pero dito sa qualitative research design, you have to look into individual responses all over again. Matrabaho yung pag-code, matrabaho yung pag-come up ng analytical themes. Okay? So yung question now, there's another method. Itong method na to, mas in-explore to in recent years, yung mixed method. Yung idea ng mixed methods, you combine yung quantitative methods at saka yung qualitative methods. So in other words, you integrate both quantitative and qualitative research methods in a single study. So yung kagandahan dito, it fosters a better understanding about the problem. Kasi mayroon kang survey na close-ended, pero at the same time, mayroon ka ring ginawang, say, interview. Napalalim mo dun sa interview, yung hindi mo mapalalim dun sa close-ended survey. So ito yung ginagawa ngayon, yung mixed method. Right? So data can be cross-examined or triangulated. Ano kaya yung data na nakukuha ko sa survey? Ano kaya yung data na nakukuha ko dun sa interview? So in the end, data become more meaningful and it gives multiple perspectives. Yung disadvantage lang dito sa mixed method, nagiging more complex siya kasi you now have qualitative data and quantitative data to analyze, right? So probably more expertise is required and more resources are needed. But in terms of the richness of the data, the validity of the data, the reliability of the data, napakataas ang mixed methods. So I would like to encourage you actually, specifically yung mga OJT dito, na to really make use of the mixed methods. So later on, magkakaroon tayo ng exercise and hopefully we'll try to integrate dun sa mga specific research ninyo, proposals ninyo, kung ano yung posibleng quantitative and qualitative methods na pwede nyong magamit in order for you to come up with better data. Okay, so since we are in this pandemic, right? Hindi yung restrictions, personally we have IATF protocols, and when we're doing social research, we really need to interact with people. But yung question now, we cannot do face-to-face interviews or probably yung survey na ikaw ang magpapasil, an interviewer-led survey. You cannot do that anymore because of the restrictions that we have, right? Hindi ka na pwedeng makipamuhay if you would want to do ethnography, because you have that responsibility na baka magkalat ka ng COVID or baka ikaw ay mahawa din sa COVID. Right? So yung question now, ano yung mga contactless methods na we can resort to now in this pandemic? So meron tayong tinatawag na ethnography or virtual, digital, or online ethnography. So ibig sabihin, instead of going to the field, to the actual field, instead of going to communities along Pampanga River or somewhere else, pwede ka palang magbabad sa online, sa internet, right? Tingnan mo, like for instance, probably pwede kang pumasok sa mga pages, right? Or sa mga Facebook groups na devoted sa isang particular area. Let's say if it's Candaba, baka may page ang Candaba, may Facebook page ang mga taga-Candaba. At pwede kang mag-observe doon kung ano yung mga pinag-uusapan nila. So it becomes now your substitute of the actual field, yung internet, yung virtual platform, right? So you can do your ethnography online. So pwede ring social media analysis. Like for instance, mahilig tayo mga Pinoy, mahilig tayo sa social media. So you can look into posts. Baka may nag-post about, say, water pollution in Pampanga River, right? You have to call, ano yung mga posts on that? Ano yung mga pinag-uusapan sa social media about water pollution in Candaba, in Pampanga River? How about, say, yung flooding in Candaba? Mayroon bang nag-uusap noon sa social media? You have to look into that. You have to look into Facebook posts, probably sa Twitter. Probably you can look into, say, sa mga vlogs or kaya sa blogs. So pwede nyong tingnan. These are social media na pwede nyong tingnan. Then content analysis. You can look into ano yung sinasabi ng mga, say, ng mga posts. Ano yung content, right? Or kung mayroong speech rather na binigay yung, say, yung mayor ninyo about, say, conservation ng Candaba Swamp. So pwede mo i-content analysis yon. So online interviews or surveys. So instead of going to the field, instead of going house to house, pwede naman palang online survey, right? Pero again, yung sabi ko kaninang challenge, how do you randomize? So again, your randomization is very crucial sa survey. Then online interviews, you can do that, provided you have, say yung mga yung Facebook accounts, right? You can message them, or if you have their phone numbers, you can do mobile interviews, right? So you can also do desk research. This is synonymous to secondary data. So you just make use of the resources, the secondary data that you have online. So in short, pinapakita lang dito that data can still be collected remotely from home. So pwede pala. So kahit mayroong pandemic, you can still collect data. Okay? So probably you can include that later on sa research design ninyo. Okay? So probably uh, restrictions will still be in place. So you have to do something how to address these restrictions. So there are methods that can be explored in this pandemic. Okay, so so we're done. So I now go over to the OJT exercise. I mean the activity for the OJT here. Uh, okay, so I'll entertain questions, and I guess there's a question here from Roy. Uh, Good day, this is Roy Matos from Pisau. I believe social researchers are powerful tool for conservation along with biological sciences. If we want to do social research to support conservation of a species like Arayat, Pitugo, and Pampanga, what would you think is the most doable and relevant research we can do? Can you cite some examples you know on how social studies were used for conservation? Yes, sobrang dami. Sabi mo kanina, we're promoting a more integrative method when we're doing environmental research, or when we are expounding or exploring a particular issue, say for instance, conservation issue about, say, a forest ecosystem. Marami ng method na explore. Like for instance, the methods that we have here, pwede mong magamit. Like yung go over, tingnan natin, isa-isahin natin. Sabi natin kanina, you have quantitative data and qualitative data. Quantitative data, probably you can look into landscape. Hindi ko nasulat dito, but you can look into spatial analysis, right? So you have to quantify yung land use, land cover changes. So this is more quantitative. But how do you support that with a more qualitative? So you go to the field. You tingnan mo kung probably you validate bakit bumababa yung forest cover. So you can probably do some interviews. You can probably do some ethnography. So you stay on the field. And you can probably do some survey also para mas maintindihan yung pagkonte ng forest covers. And your data can be used to of course para ma-design mo yung conservation ng, say for instance, yung sa Mount Arayat, right? So I think yung I guess the siguro yung lesson dito is wag ma-restrict sa isang method. Explore different methods in gathering data and eliciting data. Because when you have a plurality of methods, a plethora of methods that can be used to analyzing the social problem, the environmental problem, the environmental condition of a place, you have a better grasp of what is happening in the place. So explore both quantitative and qualitative methods. So sa conservation, nauuso ngayon yung, like for instance, yung risk assessments, right? So may mga questionnaires on resiliency, on the assessment of risk, on the assessment of vulnerability, or the assessment of exposure of a particular community. So when you do risk assessment, you make use of survey. Gumagamit ka pa rin ng survey to do your risk assessment. But of course, it must be complemented with other methods like your spatial method, your GIS. That's a powerful tool when we're talking about landscape. Okay, so again, the lesson here: integrate methods, use mixed methodologies. Okay, so I hope I answer your question, Sir Roy. I have another question here. Good morning po. How can we apply ethnography to residents living in the slums where majority of them have limited access? Yeah, that's a problem. Napaka-problema ng online methods. I guess that's really the challenge now, right? Yung pag-explore ng contactless methods. Why? Because we're talking here, we should be addressing yung equity ng access to internet, right? Or even to gadgets, right? So some of us, most probably dun sa ibang areas, yung ibang households, walang internet, walang cellphone even. So how do you do that? That's really a limitation. So I don't know kung paano ma-address yan, but it's hard really to go over, especially in these trying times. But again, the idea of netnography is ikaw na researcher, bumababad ka doon sa mga social communities, online communities. And you observe what they're talking about, or you even participate. Pero yung tanong dito, paano kaya yung mga nandun sa area, sa mga slums, along riparian ecosystems, along tawag dito, Pampanga River, right? Baka naman, 'di ba, nakakapag-Facebook ba ang mga ito, right? So baka naman they are part of say Facebook group. So it really takes a lot of patience, a lot of work to really scour these pages, these Facebook groups, these conversations online. Pero in some areas, this has been proven to be effective also. Pero yun nga yung restrictions, paano yung mga communities na walang gaanong access sa internet, right? So probably, I don't know, probably you have to be creative, specifically like for instance, survey. Pwedeng mag-resort to survey, right? So you can, kasi yung consideration din actually sa survey is paano yung mga residents ay hindi marunong magbasa. So yung ginagawa, which has been tried by other researchers, doon sa area, you get somebody from the area na marunong magbasa or probably trainable in facilitating the survey. So yung taga doon mismo sa area na yun, siya yung magbabahay-bahay. So that minimizes probably the spreads. Kasi ikaw na researcher, hindi ka na doon sa pupunta sa area. You'll have somebody from the area do the survey for you. So that's probably one way that we can explore. Okay? But again, sabi ko kanina, there are so many methods. Pwede lang pag-isipan yung research design. At again, the lesson that I'm trying to drive at here, wag mo kontento sa isang method. Okay? Sir John Lendil Castro, yes sir, you're raising your hand.
Hello po. Good morning po. I
Yes.
would just like to raise question po kasi po, as you've said before po, to avoid biases and to make more the data credible, we must randomize the collection of data.
Yes.
Ngayon po yung question ko po, how about po yung mga gumagamit po ng purposive sampling as their sampling technique? How can we assure po na yung pong mga data na i-collect po namin is credible and reliable po, especially po if the total population po or the sample size is in small scale lang po?
Okay, so you're talking about a small sample or pero yung question, gaano kalaki yung population? Malaki ba yung population?
Ano lang po, kumari po around 300 lang po or 200 ganun po.
Okay. Yeah, so sabi mo kanina mahalaga yung sampling design, right? So if you have a 300 na, kung meron kang 300 na population, if you have enough resources, if you think kaya ng resources mo, ng manpower, ng logistics, na makover lahat ng 300, you cover. Okay? Pero yung question dito, baka it might not be, how do you call this, rational to cover everything. Kasi like for instance, you have to look into your population. Tingnan mo, heterogeneous ba or homogeneous yung population mo? Right? Makikita mo yun eh. So, if homogeneous yung population mo, you'll be expecting the same response from one person to another. Pero kung heterogeneous yung population mo, probably you'll be getting different responses. So, if homogeneous yung response mo, yung respondents mo, probably it doesn't pay to cover the entire 300. You really have to do with sampling. So, meron naman tayong sampling design. right? So you have to look into your confidence level. Like if you want to say have a 95% confidence level, and you have to look also into your margin of error. Kung gusto mo ng ng mas mababang margin of error, so mas how do you call this, mas valid, mas reliable yung data. So yung dito dapat mataas yung confidence level as high as 95%, and the margin of error could be as low as 5% or 3%. So when you have your population, your big N, and you have your confidence level, and you have your margin of error, madidetermine mo na yung required population size. So may mga how do you call this, calculator, sample size calculator online that you can make use. So i-input mo lang yung population, the confidence level, and the margin of error, and you'll get to have your sample size. So again, once you draw your sample size, dapat you'll have the list of the population. Kailangan makakuha na ka ng listahan para para maiwasan mo yung bias. And from that list of 300, say kung yung kailangan mo ay say 260, you draw 260 from that randomly. So you make use of random generator, you can make use of fishbowl method, but again, the idea here is randomization. Okay, so in short, you don't need to cover everything or everyone in the population, especially if your population is homogeneous. Malalaman mo naman yan like because you pilot your instrument, right? Your survey instrument. Kung makita mo, let's say you piloted 10 na members of population na yan, at nakita mo na almost similar yung responses, then probably you can say, you'll have a hunch, a hint, na probably yung population mo ay homogeneous. So if that's the case, you don't need to cover, you don't need to have complete enumeration. Magsasayang ka lang ng resources. So you do the sampling procedure. Okay, so I hope I answer your question. Yes, Sir Gerald.
Hi, Sir Ed. Thank you for a very comprehensive discussion for today. So we are already in our Q&A section portion of our webinar series. So ano lang, it's not a question but actually an input doon sa questions kanina, my own insights. So yung question ni Sir Roy regarding Arrayopithecus or Arrayopithecus endemic sa Luzon, it's a species endemic to Luzon. So
I was thinking
yung question is
endemic siya na. Is it
endemic cycad? It's a cycad.
Oh, okay.
Cycad species which is endemic to Luzon. So nakita din siya not just only in Arayat but also in Ilocos. So primarily sa buong Luzon siya endemic. As per DNR references. So yung what can we do dito siguro sir is we could do social research. Pwede natin i-document yung local ecological knowledge siguro ng mga residents dito sa Arayat Pitogo by documenting yung local ecological knowledge nila. Kung alam nila kung ano yung knowledge nila about this, probably could get information from this para makabuo tayo ng conservation scheme or conservation practice para sa Arayat Pitogo. So that is one study that we could consider. So pwede rin kasi baka iba yung ano din nila, baka iba yung local ecological knowledge ng mga dito sa Pampanga at iba yung dun sa Ilocos kasi nakikita rin daw siya doon. So baka iba yung ecological knowledge. So from there, pwede nating simulan yung mga conservation management practices. So yun. Tapos yung kay Sir Mark, kay Mark, he will be doing a WTP sa isang river sa Angeles City. Siguro before natin itignan yung isang methodology, it's also important to know the profile of our respondents. So if limited yung access nila sa internet, so why will use a methodology na restricted tayo doon? Kumbaga, if they're limited to the internet, probably netnography is not the proper methodology.
Yeah.
Kumbaga, baka may ibang methodology na pwede nating magamit for them. So yun yung, kumbaga, aside from looking doon sa methodology, kumbaga, it's very enticing, it's something new. But it is also important that we know the profile of our respondents kasi doon tayo magsisimula kung ano yung methodology na gagamitin natin. Example, why are we going to do an online survey if the area is limited in internet? So, hindi, kumbaga, limited na nga sa internet, hindi magiging effective yung methodology kung yung mismong online survey yung gagamitin. So, kaya tayo may variety of methodology. Kaya ang sabi ni Sir Ed kanina, it's we must mix or integrate different methodology for us to get a reliable data. So, you know.
Yeah.
Yes, Sir Roy, baka pwede natin siguro itong gawing proposal, research
Yeah, that's a
proposal.
good
So we could do a
proposal.
SWOT
Ngayon
analysis.
ko lang naintindihan, it's an endemic species pala. So tama yun, mahalaga yung sinabi Sir Roy ni Gerald about local ecological knowledge. Kasi baka iba yung mahalagang matingnan yung relationship kasi ng tao in the area doon sa species that we are conserving. So paano nga ba nila tinitingnan? So this is delving into a more social science perspective. Paano nila tinitingnan? Ano yung relationship nila sa species? Paano yung utilization nila ng species? So ano yung mga traditional ecological knowledge or indigenous knowledge surrounding around that particular species? So mahalaga to kasi when we're doing conservation effort, we really have to deal with people na nandun sa area, right? Kasi sila yung makikinabang, direct beneficiaries, or probably sila yung directly maapektuhan ng conservation effort. So it's good to really look into their ecological knowledge. Tama yun na tingnan natin, pwede namang we can do some interviews on them. We can do probably some ethnography, magbabad tayo sa field para maintindihan natin kung ano yung relationship nila ng community doon sa species. Specifically kung yung mga communities na ito are indigenous communities, for sure it's rich with indigenous with traditional ecological knowledge. So that's a good strategy to go forward into conservation.
Yes, Sir Ed. Tapos i-add ko din na in terms of conservation, in terms of technology din na nade-develop natin, it is very important that we have to let the community participate kasi nagkakaroon ng disconnect minsan. Kumbaga, ang laging assumption natin is, halimbawa sa technology, itong technology na to ay mapapakinabangan ng isang community. However, when we are doing the technology, hindi natin kino-consider if this technology is accepted doon sa kultura nila, doon sa mga practices nila. So yun yung nagkakaroon tayo ng problem because may disconnect. Kumbaga, hindi nila accept, kahit may technology na, hindi nila i-accept yung technology because hindi yun yung parte ng kultura nila or parte ng ways and means nila doon sa area. So kumbaga, hindi siya one size fits all, even also for conservation. Kasi sa conservation naman, at the end, ang gusto kasi natin, we will let the community participate dun sa conservation kasi sila yung gumagamit. Of course, sila dapat din yung unang mag-conserve nitong mga different species na to. So, dapat yung conservation din natin is naka-anchor siya doon sa local ecological knowledge nila. So, behavior kasi din siya. So, we're talking about the behavior of the people. So kung yung conservation management scheme natin is suited para doon sa specific community, mas maganda siya kasi for sure i-accept nila yung whatever scheme na gusto nating i-deploy doon sa lugar.
Okay. Yes, si Ma'am Evelyn has a question. Yes, Ma'am Evelyn.
Good morning po. So sir, you actually answered the question on our Zoom chat box, but there is a question here. Though you partly answered this, maybe the question is want to look on your personal experiences on this on ethnic groups because the question goes like this. So, as mentioned earlier, how would you analyze and approach group such a diverse ethnic group if you have a personal experience on your researches on this, sir?
Yeah. Specifically when we're talking about indigenous communities, I have personal experiences in doing research with indigenous peoples, specifically in Ifugao. So I've worked with some communities in Ifugao. At mahalaga yung pagbibuild ng trust. So meron tayong sa very strict kasi yung NCIP with regards to doing research in indigenous communities. So as a matter of fact, meron silang nire-require na free and prior informed consent. So ibig sabihin kailangang i-discuss mo with the community yung research mo, and you should get approval from the community kung papayagan kanilang pumasok. So full disclosure of what you want to accomplish, at may mga concerns na dapat hindi extractive yung research na gagawin mo. Like for instance, you're not supposed to be documenting some of their practices. May mga limitations on that. But the idea here really is full disclosure, getting that free prior and informed consent, at yung building ng trust kasi yung sa NCIP kasi yung perspective ng NCIP, it's more documentary. You have to have this requirements in order for you to enter the community and dealt with the community, have research in the community. Pero I think it goes beyond the documentary requirements. Mas mahalaga yung interpersonal relationship mo with the community. So once you build that trust, mas madali kang makakuha ng data. But of course, with the assurance that hindi sila mapapahamak with the data that we will be gathering from them. So in my experience at Ifugao, we did a indigenous food systems study in Ifugao. Tiningnan namin kung paano nabago yung pagkain ng mga Ifugao through time. So we document yung ginawa namin. We presented it first doon sa meron silang mainstream na ito na community. So mayroon ng mayor, mayroon ng konseho. So we presented the study to them. And we also presented the study dun sa mga traditional leaders. So may mga elders. So that somehow boost na parang it builds yung trust. These are trust building. Mahalaga kasi sa research yung trust building. Because take note, you are extracting information from them. You are extracting data from them. So the question there is, pagkakatiwalaan ka ba nila sa data? So yung pakikipag-usap mo sa mga local officials, sa mga elders in the community, sa konseho sa community, it's a way of building the trust which go beyond yung documentary requirement na hinahanap ng NCIP. Again, at the end of it, it's really the building of trust. Kahit sa mga non-IP communities, mahalaga din na nagbi-build tayo ng trust sa ating mga research participants.
Yun lang, sir. Thank you po. Tingin ko, mas luminaw po yung mga research proposal ng mga estudyante natin. Lalo na po si Lendel kasi chosen na po yung group niya kaya po purposive kasi SK official po yung mga sample dyan. Thank you po, sir. And I also learned a lot from your sharing, lalo rin sa makabago. So meron tayong netnography para sa mga online kasi nga po sa pandemic yung restriction. So though may mga limitation pa rin po, but with your mix, sinasabi to mix the correct methods para makuha yung kailangan na data. Thank you po for your insights. And sa mga estudyante po, magko-consult po sigurado kami through Serald para po makontak kayo. Thank you for your sharing, sir.
Yeah, that's right. So dapat talaga mahalaga yung appropriateness. So ibig sabihin, if you have your research questions, your objectives, then sa objectives mo ma-identify mo kasi yung research requirements mo yung data requirements, yung data needs mo. At bawat data need, ma-identify mo yung specific, yung appropriate na method na yun. So simple lang actually siya. You start from research question, go down to your objective, tingnan mo bawat objective, ano yung data needs ng bawat objective na ito. Then you look into ano yung appropriate na method para sa data need na yan. At later,
Okay, thanks.
magkakaroon pa tayo ng activity for the OJT students
Okay.
para ma-refine pa lalo yung mga research
Okay.
proposals nila.
I have no more questions, sir. So maybe we can proceed to the activity
Okay.
for our
so,
OJT.
yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ma'am Evelyn. Okay. Here's the activity for the OJT students. Okay. So si Sir Gerald, binigay niya sa akin yung mga proposals ninyo, and I'm happy with the proposals that you have. They're very relevant. They're very doable. Kailangan lang pag-isipang maigi yung mix of methods na gagamitin. Specifically, sabi nga natin, we are under the environmental science program and we want our studies to be integrative as much as possible. Ibig sabihin, combining the natural sciences and the social sciences, combining quantitative method and qualitative method, combining primary data and secondary data. So for the OJT students, go over your proposed thesis topic or research problem at mag-reflect kayo sa social dimension ng research ninyo. Because of course, your research, it's very environmental science. One of you looked into heavy metal, right? What else? Mayroong sa garbage, solid waste, right? So you just reflect on your research problem, on your proposal, at tingnan mo yung social dimension ng proposal mo. Just the social, disregard na muna yung natural science component ng research mo. So based on the social component of your proposed study, come up with 3 research questions that you would like to address. Okay? In reality, pwedeng mas marami pa to sa tatlo. Okay, you could have 4, 5 research questions. So dito, nakita mo na yung social component ng study mo, now come up with research questions. So like for instance, if I am doing a study on the water quality assessment of Pampanga River, so this could be my questions related to the social component of the study. Like for instance, what are the ecosystem services derived by households from Pampanga River? So ibig sabihin, ano yung mga benefits na nakukuha ng household sa Pampanga River? Right? Kasi this basically talks into yung utilization nila ng Pampanga River. Kasi baka yung behavior na yon may epekto dun sa water quality ng Pampanga River. Right? They may be doing some destructive activities like quarrying, for instance. Right? So what are the ecosystem services derived by households from Pampanga River? So that's one social question. Another one. Number 2, what changes in Pampanga River were observed through time by households along it? So ibig sabihin, ano yung na-experience ng mga households sa pagbabago dun sa river? Probably naranasan nila na nag-iiba ang kulay. Probably naranasan nila na yung amoy. So ito yung mga sensory, probably they'll be looking into the sensory data about the water in Pampanga River. So probably they'll look into say yung paglawak ng river. So lumalawak yung river, probably they can look into sedimentation, ma-observe naman nila ito. So these changes may be observable, could be observed by the households along the river. So this is a social question. Another one, number 3, do households contribute to the changing water quality in Pampanga River? So may contribution kaya sila dun sa pollution sa Pampanga River? So you have to look into their ways. Ano nga ba yung mga activities nila? Ano yung ginagawa nila? How do they deal with the river? Okay, so again, this is a social question that is related to water quality assessment of Pampanga River. So once you have the 3 questions, social in nature na mga questions, the next activity, the next thing that you have to do is identify your data requirements. What data you need to collect per research question. Like for instance, dun sa una, what are the ecosystem services derived by household? Probably you need data on what benefits they derive from the river, right? What economic activities are they doing in the river, or kung ano pang data na yan na related sa ecosystem services, or ano yung iba't ibang eco-services na nakukuha from the river. So it could be yung direct use, it could be indirect use. So it really depends dun sa respondents nyo. Okay, so wait lang. So identify, once you have the 3 questions, identify your data requirements, what you need to collect per research question. Then yung susunod, identify the research methods to be used in collecting each data requirement. Okay? So simple lang siya, identify 3 questions. So bawat question, ano yung mga data na kailangan nyo para masagot yung question na yan. Once you identify the data, ano yung method na pwedeng gamitin sa bawat data na yan. So mapapansin nyo later on na yung mga data pwedeng matuhog ng isang survey, right? So yung mga data pwedeng matuhog ng interviews, right? So this is a way para ma-assess ninyo yung design. Ano yung magiging design ng study ninyo? Will it be more quantitative? Will it be more qualitative? Will it be a mixed method research design? So pag nalakad nyo na yan, mas madali na yung collection ninyo ng data. Ibig sabihin, nakuha nyo yung appropriate, take note, we've been saying a while kanina pa, na dapat appropriate yung method doon sa data na kailangan mo. Right? So this is a way to check the appropriateness of your method to the data that you need. Okay? So malinaw po ba yun? May questions specifically sa ating mga OJT students? Yes. So it's already 11. Probably sabi ko kanina kay Gerald will be back later this afternoon para mapag-usapan to and probably check yung refinements, further refinements na pwedeng yung gawin rather dun sa mga proposals ninyo.
Sir Ed, I think pwede dating i-meet sa mamaya. I mean, after the webinar part, i-discuss natin din ulit sa mga OJT. So, announce ko na lang din na yung mga OJT students for NVI side ay maiwan muna. Wag mo nang aalis after the webinar so we could discuss further yung activity natin for today. So we also have other students here. Meron din tayong mga students from development, communication, from forestry na nag-participate, sir, and also faculty members. So thank you po sa mga nag-participate sa atin. So I think I'll give the microphone ulit sa ating MC. Thea?
And thank you po, Doc Je, Sir Ed, at saka Ma'am Kahukom for presiding po our open forum and such. And I would like to say thank you for Sir Edward for that illuminating and very detailed presentation po about ethics in social research and gap analysis. Okay, I would like to acknowledge once again our participants from different colleges, both here in Zoom and Facebook Live. And let us all offer a virtual clap and joy for our resource speaker for today, who shared his time and expertise in the field of his specialization, and also to those participants who placed their questions. I hope everyone have enjoyed listening and learning today as much as I did. Now, to give a recognition for your fidelity for the science and your will to share your knowledge to people, especially here at PSAU, we would like to extend our gratitude for giving your time and effort to share your mastery in this presentation, Mr. Ed. The Pampanga State Agricultural University, through the College of Arts and Sciences, Department of Biology, represented by Dr. Evelyn V. Tetaan, the External and International Affairs Office, represented by Dr. Rafael, the Innovation Center for Agroecology, Climate Change, and Agripreneurship, represented by Dr. Gerald Salas, and the PSAU Biology Society award the certificate. Allow me to read. Pampanga State Agricultural University, PAC Magalang, Pampanga, College of Arts and Sciences, Department of Biology, External and International Affairs Office, Innovation Center for Agroecology, Climate Change and Agripreneurship, PSA Biology Society. This certificate of appreciation is hereby awarded to Mr. Eduardo Requino for his invaluable service as resource speaker during the PSA High 9 webinar series and PSA live session with the topic of Ethics in Social Research and Gap Analysis, virtually hosted by Pampanga State Agricultural University on August 27, 2021, given this 27th day of August 2021. Signed by the OIC and Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Anita G. David. To seize this moment virtually, may I ask everyone, including our participants, to open our cameras and join us as we give our best smile as we go for first slide. Ayan po. That smile po. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And 1, 2, 3. Okay. May I take this time to invite everyone to join us again to our next PSA High 9 webinar series. The link for our post-evaluation form is now available. You may now access it in our Zoom chat box or in the comment section of our FB page. For our students, we would like to remind you again to please use your personal email instead of your Eskwela accounts in accomplishing our attendance and post-evaluation form. Also, please be reminded about Dr. Gerald's reminder to you guys that the Envy Sci major, please stay po. Okay? After the webinar proper, we will allot 1.5 hours to accomplish the form. And by accomplishing it, we will send you your e-certificates. Fail to comply on time, and we will give no other options aside from tuning into our next PSAU High 9 webinar series the next day, because this is a computer-generated form. At this closing instance, thank you for supporting the PSAU High 9 webinar series, and we hope to see you again next webinars. Your active and never-ending support has made this webinar a success. This has been your host, Thea Cazea, and wishing you all a good morning. Happy lunch po. Thank you, Doc Ed. Thank you, Doc Je and Sir Ed. Ma'am Kahukom, thank you po.
Jim, you're holding the live stream. Tama ba? Pwede na siguro nating i-stop din.
Si Sir Nat po yata yung host. Hindi ko po alam paano siya i-stop.
Sir Nat?